Listen to that rain hitting the corrugated tin roof. It's the loudest silence I've ever heard. In Gary, Indiana, when the snow fell, it muffled the world, tucked you into a cold, quiet bed. But here in Tondo, the rain just screams at you. It screams about everything you've lost. Look at these hands. Take a good look. They're mapped with scars from 42 years of crawling through rusted vents and damp basements as an HVAC tech. I spent half my life in the dark so I could retire in the light. 6 years ago, when the divorce papers finally stopped sliding across the table, I walked away with half a 401k and a house I'd paid for with my own blood. 2 years ago, I sold that house. I walked onto a plane with 2 suitcases and a wire transfer for $215,000. In my head, I wasn't Arthur Miller, the retired guy from Gary. I was a king. I was the 1%. I had a vision of white sand, a cold drink, and a woman who didn't look at me like I was a piece of furniture that had outstayed its welcome. I thought I was buying peace. I didn't realize I was just buying a front row seat to my own execution. Go ahead, check your bank app. Look at that balance and feel good about it. I did the same thing. But right now, while the humidity in this 100-square-foot boarding house tries to melt the skin off my bones, I'm looking at my own screen. $143. That's all that's left of 42 years of work. That's what's left of the house, the sweat, the pride, and the dream. I didn't lose my money at a casino. I didn't get robbed in an alley. I gave it away. I handed it over, piece by piece, to a ghost who called herself Elena. I'm 68 years old and I'm washing a single plastic bowl in a bucket of cold water because the pipes in this slum are as broken as my dignity. If you're sitting there in the States or Europe or Australia and you're tired of being invisible, if you're tired of the cold and you're looking at those expat paradise videos on your laptop, listen to me. Stop. Take a breath and look at me. I'm the ghost of your future if you let your ego do your math. I had a kingdom in my pocket and a castle in Indiana. Today, I have a stomach ulcer and enough money for maybe 3 more days of rice. I didn't lose my fortune. I traded it for a fantasy, and the subscription just ran out. Let's talk about Gary. Not the version you see in the old songs, but the real Gary, Indiana. I want you to picture the slush, that thick, gray, salted muck that clings to your boots for 5 months of the year. That was my world. 42 years. That's how long I spent on my knees in the dark. I was an HVAC tech kid. You know what that does to a man? It turns your joints into rusted hinges. I spent the Reagan years, the Clinton years, and the Bush years crawling through fiberglass insulation and rat droppings in the Midwest winters just to keep people warm who didn't even know my name. My lungs are probably half full of asbestos. And for what? A gold watch? No. I got a bad back and a sense of exhaustion that goes deeper than sleep. 6 years ago, my marriage finally hit the wall. 30 years of good enough ended in a cold room with 2 lawyers and a clock that ticked like a heartbeat. When the dust settled, 50% of my 401k, money I'd bled for dollar by dollar for 4 decades, just vanished. Legalized robbery. I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment that smelled like pine sol and missed opportunities. In America, when you're 68 and blue collar, you aren't a man anymore. You're a ghost with a social security number. You become invisible. I'd sit in a coffee shop, pay $6 for a lukewarm latte, and watch women my age look right through me like I was a piece of the architecture. I tried the dating apps. My God, what a circus. They didn't want a partner. They wanted a travel buddy with a deep pocket and a house in the Hamptons. To them, I wasn't Arthur. I was just a disposable checkbook that was running out of ink. I was living in black and white. Every day was a repeat of the last. The same gray sky, the same microwave dinner, the same crushing silence in a house that felt too small for my memories but too big for my future. I was tired of being cold. I was tired of being lonely. But mostly, I was tired of the feeling that I had worked my entire life just to be a background character in someone else's story. I was ripe for it. I was a sitting duck. I was looking for a way out. And the internet, well, the internet has a way of showing you exactly what your ego wants to see. I didn't know it yet, but I was already writing the check for my own destruction. I just needed someone to tell me I was a king. It started with a late-night rabbit hole and a flickering laptop screen. There I was, sitting in that one-bedroom apartment in Gary, the radiator clanking like a dying engine, and the YouTube algorithm decided it was time to sell me a dream. I clicked on one of those expat paradise videos, you know the ones. High saturation thumbnails of turquoise water, palm trees, and men who looked just like me, guys with gray hair and bad knees, walking hand in hand with women who looked like they'd stepped out of a different century. The narrator's voice was smooth, confident. He talked about geo-arbitrage, a fancy word for being a big fish in a small pond. He said, "In the States, you're struggling. In the Philippines, you're a king. Your Social Security makes you the 1%. I grabbed a yellow legal pad and started doing the math. My Social Security check was $1,850 a month. In Gary, after rent, utilities, and insurance, I was eating generic brand cereal for dinner and praying the car wouldn't break down. But the video said I could live like royalty in Manila for $1,200 a month. I'd have $600 of pure play money left over. But it wasn't just the money. It was the way those women looked at the men in the videos. It wasn't the "what can you do for me lately" look I got back home. It was respect. It was traditional values. They promised a world where a man who provided was actually appreciated, not just tolerated until the next alimony check was due. I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in a decade. Hope. Or maybe it was just my ego finally finding a place where it could breathe again. I didn't wait. I didn't consult a financial advisor. I didn't even talk to my daughter. Within 30 days, I'd put the house on the market. It sold for $215,000 net. Seeing that number hit my bank account was like a hit of pure adrenaline. I felt invincible. I packed 2 suitcases, mostly linen shirts and a few tools I couldn't bear to part with, and bought a one-way ticket to Ninoy Aquino International. I remember looking out the window as the plane taxied in Gary one last time, watching the gray slush get smaller and smaller. I thought I was escaping the cold. I thought I was leaving the invisible man behind. I didn't realize I was just a walking ATM with a U.S. passport, flying straight into a storm I'd paid for myself. I was 68 years old, and I was convinced that for the price of a mid-size sedan, I had just bought a brand new life. God, I was such a fool. The moment I stepped off that plane at Ninoy Aquino, the heat hit me like a physical weight, a thick, wet blanket of salt, diesel, and jasmine. In Gary, the air is thin and sharp, like it's trying to cut you. Here it felt like a lung full of life. I stood there in my New Balance sneakers and a sweat-stained polo, and for the first time in 40 years, nobody looked through me. The security guards nodded. The taxi drivers called me sir. It's a drug, kid. Pure, uncut validation. When you've been a ghost for a decade, being noticed feels like being born again. I didn't head for the budget hostels the smart expats talk about. No, I had $215,000 sitting in my account like a loaded gun, and I wanted to pull the trigger. I went straight to Makati. I signed a lease on a penthouse that cost $2,200 a month. Back in Indiana, that kind of money gets you a mortgage on a 4-bedroom house with a yard. In Manila, it bought me floor-to-ceiling glass, a view of the skyline that looked like Blade Runner, and a concierge who bowed when I walked into the lobby. I wasn't an HVAC tech anymore. I was a mogul. I was the man with the plan. And then there was Elena. I met her on one of those sites everyone tells you is reputable. She was 25, with skin the color of local honey and eyes that seemed to hold every bit of respect I'd been denied in my own country. She was shy. She spoke in a whisper and told me she hated Western feminism, that she just wanted a man she could take care of, a man who would be the head of the household. It was the perfect script, and I was the lead actor who didn't realize he was being fed lines. For the first few weeks, I was living in a fever dream. I was taking her to dinners that cost $100, more than I used to spend on groceries for a week. I was buying her $500 dresses just to see her smile, to feel that surge of pride when we walked into a high-end mall and people whispered. I felt like a hero. I felt powerful. Every time I swiped that card, I wasn't just paying for a meal or a garment. I was paying for the look in her eyes that told me I mattered. The math was already failing, but my ego was doing the accounting. I was burning $5,500 a month. My Social Security was $1,850. You don't need a calculator to see the cliff I was driving toward. But when you're 68 and a beautiful woman is holding your hand and telling you you're her everything, you don't look at the dashboard. You just step on the gas. I thought I had finally found the real love that America had cheated me out of. I didn't realize that in this part of the world, love isn't a feeling, it's a transaction. And I was about to find out exactly how much the service fee was. The leaks never start with a burst pipe, kid. Not in HVAC, and certainly not in a paradise like this. It starts with a drip. So small you barely notice it until you're standing ankle deep in your own ruin. 2 months in, the drip started. Elena's phone rang at 3 a.m., and the sound of her sobbing was the most gut-wrenching thing I'd ever heard. Her mother back in the province was supposedly dying of congestive heart failure. In the States, you call 911. Here, you call the guy with the U.S. passport. She told me the private hospital wouldn't even admit her mother without a cash deposit. $18,500. That's what it cost to save her. I didn't ask for a receipt. I didn't call the doctor. I just went to the bank feeling like a goddamn hero. I thought I was buying her mother's life. I was actually just paying the first installment on my own disappearance. Then came the future. Elena would sit on the balcony of our Makati penthouse, looking out at the smog, and talk about how she wanted us to have a real home away from the city. She found 2 hectares of land in Batangas, green, lush, and quiet. For our children, Arthur, she'd whisper, for our retirement. It cost $92,000. I knew the law. I knew a foreigner couldn't own a square inch of soil in this country, but my ego told me that didn't apply to us. We were different. We had real love. So I wired the money, watched the deed get stamped with her name, and celebrated with a $300 bottle of scotch. I thought I was building a castle. I was just digging a $92,000 hole to be buried in. But the bleed wasn't just the big hits. It was the lifestyle. You start to believe your own hype. I was spending $59,000 over 14 months just on nothing. Shopping trips to Greenbelt, fancy dinners every night because Elena deserved the best, and the constant rhythmic tapping of small family requests. $50 for a cousin's tuition, $200 for a roof repair, $1,000 for a funeral. It felt like pennies because I was still thinking in Gary, Indiana math. The final blow was the bakery. Elena said her brother needed a dignified way to support the family, so we wouldn't have to keep sending money. It made sense. It sounded like a business. I dropped $45,000 on construction, ovens, and a storefront. I thought I was being a provider, a patriarch. I thought I was securing my legacy. Every time my bank app gave me that low balance alert, I'd just close it. I'd look at Elena's smile, feel the warmth of the sun, and tell myself that money was just paper. But this life, this was real. I was 68 years old, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. I was the source. I was the king. I didn't realize that a king without gold is just an old man in a strange land, and the people bowing to you are only checking to see how much more they can shake out of your pockets before you hit the floor. The bakery was finished on a Tuesday. I remember because it was the day I realized I'd paid $45,000 for a building I wasn't allowed to enter. I walked over there, thinking I'd smell the yeast and see the pride in her brother's eyes. Instead, he stood in the doorway, arms crossed over his chest, blocking the light. He didn't smile. He didn't say thank you. He just looked at me with a cold, flat indifference and told me in broken English that I didn't belong there. Family only, Arthur. You don't speak the language. You just get in the way. I walked back to the penthouse, my chest feeling like someone had tightened a pipe wrench around my heart. I sat at my mahogany desk and finally did what I'd been avoiding for 18 months. I opened the bank app. $9,800. I stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. $215,000. 42 years of Indiana winters, gone in less than 2 years. My burn rate was $5,500 a month. On my Social Security, I was dead in 8 weeks. I wasn't a king anymore. I was a man who couldn't afford his own funeral. When Elena came home carrying shopping bags from a boutique in Greenbelt, I told her. I told her the party was over. I told her we had to move to a studio in a cheaper district, cut the family allowance to zero, and sell the bakery equipment to recoup some cash. I expected her to cry. I expected her to hug me and say we'd get through it together. But the woman I'd spent $200,000 on vanished in a heartbeat. The shy, traditional girl was replaced by a statue made of ice. Her eyes went from honey to flint. She didn't raise her voice. She just lowered the temperature in the room until I could see my own breath. "You are old, Arthur," she said, the words cutting cleaner than a sheet metal shear. "And now you are stingy. I gave you my youth, and you want to take me to a slum? You are not the man I thought you were." The next morning she was gone, and so was the SUV I'd bought her. I took a bus to Batangas, 3 hours in the heat, breathing in blue exhaust, clinging to the hope that the land, the $92,000 retirement lot, was still my sanctuary. I walked up the dirt path to the property line and stopped. There was a man sitting on the porch of the small cottage I'd paid to renovate. He was in his 20s, fit, tan, and wearing a pair of Ray-Bans I'd seen in Elena's shopping bags a week earlier. He wasn't a cousin. He was the man she actually loved. I was just the guy who'd paid for the house they were going to live in. When I called the local police, screaming about fraud and theft, the officer didn't even take his hands off his belt. He looked at the deed I'd insisted be in Elena's name because I wanted to prove my trust. He shrugged, a slow, agonizing movement that told me everything I needed to know. "It's her land, Joe," he said. "You were just a guest, and the lady says she wants the guest to leave." I stood there on the edge of a road I'd paid to pave, watching the cousin laugh as he closed the gate. I had my passport, a half-empty bottle of water, and the sudden, sickening realization that in this country, the law doesn't protect the money. It protects the blood. And I was just a ghost with an empty wallet, standing in the middle of a dream that had never belonged to me. The rain has finally stopped, but the humidity, It just sits on your chest like a wet wool blanket. I'm sitting here on a plastic crate, looking at a ledger I started keeping too late. You know, in the HVAC business, if you miscalculate the load on a system, the whole thing eventually freezes up or burns out. There's no middle ground. I did the math on everyone else's houses for 40 years, but when it came to my own life, I let my ego hold the calculator. Let's look at the damage. Let's be real surgeons about this. $18,500 for a hospital stay that likely never happened. $92,000 for 2 hectares of Batangas soil that I'll never set foot on again unless I'm trespassing. $45,000 for a bakery that's currently feeding the man who took my place. And $59,357 on the dream. The dinners, the clothes, the grab rides, the weekend getaways where I thought I was the guest of honor, but I was really just the sponsor. That's $214,857. Gone. Evaporated. That's 42 years of Indiana winters, 1,000-hour overtime shifts, and breathing in dust, all traded for 18 months of feeling like a king. I have $143 left in my pocket. I can't afford a flight back to Gary. And even if I could, what's waiting for me? A park bench and a coat I can't afford to dry clean? I'm 68 years old and I'm starting over in a country that doesn't want me, living in a room the size of a walk-in closet. I spent my life crawling through vents to escape the cold, only to end up here, sweating in the dark, realization hitting me like a lead pipe. I didn't lose my money to a scammer. I lost it to my own arrogance. I wanted to believe I was special. I wanted to believe that a 25-year-old woman loved a 68-year-old man from Gary for his wisdom and his character. She didn't hate me. Elena wasn't a monster. She was an opportunist, and I was the opportunity. She saw a man who valued his ego more than his common sense, and she just provided the service I was clearly asking for. I bought a subscription to a fantasy, and the moment the card declined, the lights went out. So here's the warning from the ghost of your future. If you're sitting back home feeling invisible, looking at those videos of paradise, listen close. Money is just paper. You can lose it and still breathe. But time? Time is the only thing they really steal from you. I traded the last of my good years for a lie I told myself. Don't come here thinking your passport makes you a king. In this world, if you don't respect the math will eventually come for your head. I thought I was buying peace, but you can't buy peace from people who see you as a transaction. Keep your house, keep your pride, because once the gold is gone, the only thing left is the heat, the silence, and the long, slow walk to the end.